Hi, everybody. Welcome to Next Media. I am Mike Shields here. I'm here with Ari Paparo, special guest today. He is the CEO and founder of Marketecture, as many of you know, and he is the author of the upcoming book, Yield, How Google Bought, Built, and Bullied Its Way to Advertising Dominance. Hey, Ari, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Mike.
So many things to talk about. I've been enjoying the hell out of your book. It's great fun for me because I know a lot of the people in the book, but not everybody. I've covered a lot of the events, but not to this depth. I'm still learning lots of interesting things. It's a great read, but I'm gonna try and look at this from a 30,000 foot perspective, maybe.
Sure.
Because I think this is really about to get into it. There are multiple Google antitrust accusations and suits. This is specifically about their actions in the programmatic advertising ad tech publishing world, not search, not those other things. Just to be clear, I think the question I would ask, and a lot of people might ask, is how the hell did the feds not see this from the front, from the beginning, right? If you are there's no perfect analogy, but it's like, how could you let a player own the exchange and all these other pieces? Like, wouldn't this be like Goldman Sachs owning the stock exchange or something like that? But as you take people through this or how this happened, it wasn't that easy to know how big programmatic was going to be, where it was going. The feds did look at and we're talking about the initial big deal, which was Google buying DoubleClick. And there were other exchanges around at that time, like Right Media. So that's a long question of where do you come out in shouldn't they have known this? Shouldn't they have seen this coming? Is that an unfair thing to say?
Yeah. So to start with, the story is sort of bookended. From the beginning is where the invention of the ad exchange, which pretty quickly leads to the acquisition of DoubleClick. So It's a technology innovation that changes all the parameters of this $1 trillion advertising market, and that opens the floodgates to all kinds of disruption and changes. Yep. And then Google ends up, through the DoubleClick acquisition, in a pole position, a control position. And then they slowly but surely march towards dominance, where currently, according to the courts, they have 90% market share of the ad serving market and more than 50% of the ad exchange market. So yeah, I have a chapter about the FTC's review of the DoubleClick deal. And the FTC was in a difficult position because at the time the DoubleClick deal was being evaluated, which I guess was 2008, or 7 to 8.
Yep.
And they write this in their report, the market for this sort of indirect automated sales of media, what we now call programmatic or exchanges, was so nascent. It was like a new invention. There certainly wasn't $1 billion worth of media going through it. It was very small. I think AdX probably had something like $50 million of media.
I remember covering these early companies and being like, what the hell are you talking about? This isn't how media works. Like it's not going to make sense over time.
Yes. And at the time there was also evidence that Google had been working on its own ad server and had not made much progress on that. And of course, buying the leading ad server solved that problem, but at the time, the court or the FTC said that was evidence that just being Google was not enough to dominate another market. So I think we have to give a little bit of the benefit of the doubt that it was very hard to picture that the cards would play out the way they did. And also, we have the internal documents from Google in many cases with people like Neil Mohan and Jonathan Bellick and the other executives there in those days, and especially in the ad meld competition days, saying, we're behind. People aren't using our ad exchange. Ad exchange might not be successful. That's what they're saying internally.
There's some elements of they don't even totally know what they're buying in some of these cases when companies look at these back then.
Yes, exactly. So I don't think it was preordained that they would be this absolutely dominant. Or it wasn't also preordained that programmatic was going to become this dominant, that it was going to effectively become the lingua franca of all of digital advertising. But it all did happen, and it did roll out that way. And it turned out to be sort of a winner-take-all market to some extent.
Now, one of the things that stood out to me, and I should have understood this better, I think, but because the real, tell me if I'm articulating this right, the real problem, or that the feds missed, or that regulators missed, or that no one, maybe not enough people grasped, was it wasn't just that a company that sells a bunch of ads was also going to own the marketplace, which feels like it has a lot of conflict. it was the like bad thing that was hiding in plain sight was that the advantage that it was going to be connected to their server was so significant. Can you explain that and why maybe that people didn't grasp why that was a big deal?
Yeah, sure. So the ad server is the software that determines what ad ultimately shows up on the page and effectively determines who the winner is of an auction. Even if you have an ad exchange also bidding into it, the ad server is the final step. And just like the way you can get sniped on eBay, where you want to buy something on eBay and someone comes in the last second and grabs it for 1 cent higher than your bid, the ad server has the information about the prices being offered in that auction. And through a product that really DoubleClick invented before the Google acquisition called dynamic allocation, the built-in ad exchange had that information and was able to effectively snipe the bids for 1 cent higher than anybody else. And so when you combine, that already is a pretty big advantage that anyone who owns an ad server could theoretically keep auctions for itself at an effective price.
So to put it in like more frank terms, maybe an ad exchange isn't just an ad exchange, even at that time.
Right, because it's competing.
You could have a bunch of others that would not have that factor involved.
Yeah, that's right. So the ad exchange is collecting the bids and choosing the highest bid among the bidders in the ad exchange. But you could have other things that are bidding also, like your orders from your direct sales force or ad networks that aren't on the ad exchange. They just have old fashioned ad tags. So there's all this demand coming from all these different sources, but the ad server sees it all. It has to. It's the final bottleneck. So that information advantage was a big one. And then you have the secondary advantage that you started your question with, which is having this enormous amount of demand, meaning the advertisers, which Google had. So it's as if, eBay also had, let's say, I don't know, a sales force that was out there, talking to collectors and offering them goodies. And then whenever a nice item of value showed up on their auction, they knew exactly who was willing to pay for it. And they knew what the price was going to be at close. And they could just grab it for 1 cent more over and over and over again. Independent collectors would feel a little bit, abused by that system.
Right. Yeah. And we'll get out of the weeds in a moment, I promise. But the what also stuck out to me is the subsequent deals when Google starts building. Like we said, the feds looked at the DoubleClick deal, and DoubleClick had already been in the spotlight from previous deals years ago. The Abacus thing they got killed for. It was when Google goes out and buys and a DSP, which was an unexpected winner, and then AdMeld. There wasn't a whole lot of scrutiny there at all.
Nope.
And I guess there probably should have been, but the sort of sneaky thing about buying, again, there were a lot of DSPs in the market, bigger names, but the cookie to cookie connection was significant, right? That I don't think if the feds didn't understand the significance of the ad server, the cookie thing was even probably more lost than a lot of those people who were paying attention.
Yeah. So Google acquired Invite Media, which turned into DV360, which is the number one player in the buy side DSP market.
Right.
At the time, the acquisition I think was for $80 million, and it has been reported, I think by Business Insider a while back, that they arranged for the price to be just low enough to escape any scrutiny whatsoever.
Really? I was going to say, it doesn't scream like we got to watch this deal.
But also, it just brings up the point that the antitrust and the regulations in the United States are meant to prevent monopolies. And the DSP market, Invite Media, was probably a 10% market share company.
Right,
and it just would not have.
It's not like Google tomorrow buying the Trade Desk. People are like, what the hell are you doing?
Exactly.
It wasn't like
that. And also, it's worth noting that when the FTC did look at DoubleClick, there's quite a bit of testimony in Congress and to the group about the information power and the privacy issues relating to the acquisition. And those had no bearing on the decision because the FTC correctly noted that their mandate had nothing to do with those issues. It only had to do with anti-competitiveness.
So, I was trying to think of another analogy. It would be crazy if today, a holding company owned a television network. You'd be like, what the hell? How can you own both sides of the equation? But it wasn't, I know that's not a perfect one, but it wasn't that clear that this was like totally going to be monopolistic at that time.
Yeah, I think you made that quote about Goldman Sachs owning the New York Stock Exchange, and that's like a paraphrase of a real email that Jonathan Bellick sent that turned out to be like Exhibit A in every single case against Google. He probably regrets to this day sending that email. But he mused internally at Google by email, it is as if a bank owned an exchange. And I think that it all brings up the fact that while the advertising market became financialized and became like the financial market, it was never regulated. There's not a single regulation about how transactions need to clear in the advertising market. It's entirely on best behavior and contract law.
No one is paying attention. Like there's another anecdote that stuck out to me when Brian Lester and WPP starts what was B3, but eventually became a trading desk. Like they were just kind of using their clients' budgets to like tag the whole web and accumulate all this data. It wasn't like, I'm not saying it was illegal or wrong, but it was like, that's the kind of thing that feels like if someone was watching, they would have said, what's going on here? But nobody was watching or cared.
Yeah, there's no privacy regulation in the United States. It's certainly not in the historical context. So putting a tag on every single campaign from every single advertiser across a holding company and collecting all those cookies and getting intelligence out of it, it's not clear what law you're breaking.
Right. It's shrewd, and maybe clients wouldn't have loved it, but it was, you didn't do anything wrong. And nothing you get to go to jail for.
Did you know what B3 stood for before?
No. Please tell people, because I thought it was very funny.
So B3, which was the precursor to Xaxis, I talked to Brian Lesser about it, and he said, we didn't have a name. We just had to come up with a name because people kept asking what it was. So we called it B3, which stood for Big Black Box.
Which is sort of very extremely telling about the entire industry in a nutshell.
It's hysterical.
Very
I
funny.
love it.
Okay, we were talking about Brian Lester. What's cool about this book, we're talking about these intricacies of the macro business and ad tech. It's a story about people, and you turn a lot of the people in this into characters to try to illustrate the different stages of the business. I guess why use that device? And one that stood out to me was interesting, that Neil Mohan, who we know is like this huge guy at Google and runs YouTube today, had a actually different point of view in the company at one point in his career. But maybe talk about the use of characters and why this is such an interesting, eclectic world.
Yeah, because it's a tech story, but it's not really. It's about a marketplace of buyers and sellers and technology middlemen, and they're all constantly negotiating with each other for their points of view being the correct one. And it's kind of fascinating how over the course of this period of time, you had folks like Brian O'Kelly who were pushing this narrative of programmatic first, technology first. And you have other people like, Wenda Harris Millar, who is saying, no. This isn't pork bellies. This is, creative. This is about touch. And it continues with people fighting Google, like the Andrew Casalis of the world and the Steph Lasers of the world, who are like rebels at the door trying to get header bidding adopted because they know header bidding will be the first chink in the armor against Google's total dominance. And I just think it's really interesting stories, and people are pretty passionate about it.
It almost, tell me if this makes sense to you. There's a section where you talk about when Google first buys DoubleClick, and DoubleClick has a lot of classic ad. It was a tech company, but it had New York ad salespeople and non-engineering, and they're clashing with the Google people, and they're elitist. It almost it seems like a precursor of where we are today, where like so much of the business world and society and communication is being driven by these like engineering types who are maybe not the most emotionally in touch people. But they're like sort of making huge decisions about how the world works. Like, and that was like a little bit of a precursor of that. Does that sound crazy?
Yeah, no, it's not. I was there. So, I'm not a character in the book. I just want to say that because I was sort of uninvolved in various aspects, but I was there. I was the guy in the background taking notes. And there was a very different point of view of the kind of New York centric DoubleClick people versus the tech centric Mountain View people. And it was that the Mountain View people thought it should all be automated. It should all be programmatic. There should be machines making all those decisions. And the New York people were more like software people who were selling software to customers who they understood and liked to go to lunch with and like heard their problems. And I don't really say this explicitly. Maybe I hint at it, but I think a lot of the problems that Google started running into in the second half of the 2010s that led to the antitrust was about a changing of the guard where Neil Mohan left. He became the head of product and then later the CEO of YouTube. You have Jonathan Bellick left. Scott Spencer left. All these folks who basically built the display business at Google moved on to other career opportunities just because they wanted to.
As happens. Yeah,
as happens. And they were replaced by people who came from search. And the people who came from search were pretty arrogant about the business, and they thought
they built the world's greatest money making machine, and they knew it.
They did, and the AdSense, which was the original product sold to publishers by Google, is self-service. It's like get a tag, make some money, don't ask any questions, and they started treating the DFP customers like that, and they didn't like that. And the DFP customers have one big advantage over Google, which is they have they have a lot of politicians on a speed dial.
Right. Okay. Well, obvious question is like, why did you do this? Because I always say I'm going to write a book, and then I'm like, wow, that seems incredibly hard, and it's hard to squeeze in your life. And then how did you figure out how to balance? You were in this world, and you were in these companies when it's happening. How did you figure out how to get that right without making an autobiography or something?
Or worse, just losing friends. And the book's not out yet, so August 5th, I'll be losing all my friends.
Hold on.
I always wanted to write a book also, and I felt that obviously as an expert in advertising technology, like I thought about books around this territory, and it all basically read like a textbook. It's like, okay, well, this was invented, blah, blah, blah. And it was only through the lens of the Google antitrust trial and the drama that's inherent in a courtroom that I started to hear the stories firsthand and said to myself, okay, this is about people, and it's about a struggle, and it's also about journalism in the future. And I felt like there was a story to be told that would cut through just the people who follow me on Twitter, but towards a more mainstream business audience that I hope will be interested in it.
When you mentioned you were there for a lot of the trial, did it feel, so many of us, including myself, have our image of trials from movies and TV, and did it feel? I'm sure it wasn't like the OJ trial, but was it dramatic? Did it feel like, wow, you could feel the stakes in the room, or was it super dry because we're talking about like pricing floors?
It was quite dramatic. It was a short trial. It was only 3 weeks, start to finish. It was very dramatic, especially the DOJ's case, because they brought ad ops and senior ad tech kind of people who gave firsthand accounts of how they couldn't switch ad servers, how they tried, how they were unable to do anything, along with sort of Google witnesses who were had pretty damning emails and other testimony, to set up the story that they were trying to tell. There were quite boring moments, though. Especially the expert witnesses were incredibly dull. But overall, it was a pretty good story.
All right, coming back to we were talking a lot about shouldn't they have seen this coming, or whether they should have or not. Fast forward, I don't know, 5, 7, 8 years later, you had people screaming about these kind of things. Like I remember famously TubeMogul yelling about how you can only buy YouTube through Google's exchange, and they put ads in the paper, and I wonder, okay, why then didn't regulators move faster? And one of my theories is, tell me if you like, ad tech companies are not sympathetic to the even though, like, I always say, like, ad fraud stories were not that big in the early on because people weren't getting ripped off. It was brands. This was the Pubmatics of the world theoretically getting screwed over.
Yeah.
Or even publishers who, I don't know if, a lot of people in Congress feel bad for them. Like, why do you think this wasn't getting more scrutiny faster?
Yeah, so there was definitely percolating scrutiny around Google and big tech in general. Probably started accelerating in 2016. And from a political point of view, from a Washington point of view, it's hard to untangle the election of 2016 and the bleed and Cambridge Analytica and Facebook from Google, even though they have nothing to do with each other. They all kind of feel like a wave together. When you get to the specifics of Google, in the advertising world, there's really two things that drew attention. There was what you just mentioned, the restriction on buying YouTube, which started in 2014 and has been testified by O'Kelly. O'Kelly testified in front of the Senate on this. It's a very big deal. And then there's the publisher thing. And the problem with the buy-side YouTube thing is that YouTube is by no definition a monopoly. It has 10% of viewership. It has,
right. Which is great, but it's not. There's 12 other players that really matter in that space.
Under U.S. law, there's nothing you can do about a non-monopoly abusing its position as long as it's not fraudulent. So that, even though that's actually a huge competitive issue and arguably anti-competitive, it's not illegal. So a lot of time is being wasted on that subject. Meanwhile, the publisher side is a much stronger case. 90% market share, et cetera. And I think that, and I tell this story in the book, that it was some of Google's actions in that time period, including something that's called UPR, which is regardless of how important it is, it basically was when Google pulled a feature away from publishers. So they took a feature away from the software publishers used that benefited Google. And that just was so obviously a problem.
Screw you, help us. Like, that was a very clear moment that they tried to play off.
A total arrogance, and I think that just fed a lot of the fuel. There's also politics. The first real case against Google in the United States was in the waning days. It was like 2 weeks before the 2020 election. So we're deep into the Trump administration. Congress had been investigating big tech. And Google was definitely not popular. And that's when the first case, led by Ken Paxton of Texas, so it's a very red state with a lot of other red states, that was the first case. That broke the dam. And it was only about 18 months, 2 years later that the DOJ filed their case. Right. It just so happens the DOJ filed the case and moved much, much quicker. And the Texas case still hasn't even come to trial.
Which is crazy. Yeah, it shows how slow these things can move. Okay, on that note, do you think we might be seeing history repeat itself? And then I'll ask about how can we even stop the next ad monopoly if it comes? My mind goes to, and Amazon and Meta are under scrutiny from regulators. Don't get me wrong, but you could argue, Amazon's doing the same playbook. You have to use their DSP, and then their marketing cloud is really essential to operating well there. I mean, yes, you could also argue there's a million other retail media companies, so who cares? But there are examples of companies trying to do this googly kind of thing. Are there more monopolies that we should be worried about, and can the feds even react?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a danger that Amazon uses its power, which is extraordinary. It's an extraordinary amount of data for marketers and reach among its audience to tie up a big portion of the media business and create a little mini monopoly. And I don't see anything stopping them right now because what they're doing is not illegal. They don't have a monopoly in anything except maybe book sales or something.
Right.
So I think it's once again a sort of a failure of the regulatory state that there's effectively nothing you can do in the United States. In Europe, though, the Digital Markets Act allows the use of the law or regulators to step in whenever there's sort of a minimum scale or maximum scale of power, which you can argue plus or minus, but at least gives them some tools to use.
Right. Okay. Now, what about the future that's coming fast? There's the how do you regulate artificial intelligence overall, which is going to be a massive challenge. But in the context of advertising, you're starting to see these black box products from Meta and Google and others. I'm sure you're going to see some similar media buying optimization tools on the buy side or wherever. I don't know that anyone is going to rule the industry or not, but if we start going in there, how could regulators even know how they work, what they might be doing wrong, or is that unregulatable?
Yeah, there's a lot to that. I mean,
sorry.
So the impact of AI on publishers is largely outside the scope of everything I've been talking about, but it is being considered in the Google Chrome search case because the judge has identified that the same data advantage that put Google in monopoly position in search is available to AI as well. More data equals better AI equals more consumer searching equals more data. So there definitely appears to be a natural monopoly in search, and maybe that'll carry over to AI. And I think that it's probably the right thing to do to look into that right now before it gets out of hand.
Yeah.
I don't know what the right remedy is. The whole problem with the search case is that the remedies are not obvious at all. Whereas in this case, the advertising case, the remedies are pretty obvious, which is to force the spin out.
I mean, you say this is the kind of thing that should be looked into right now. My mind goes towards most of Congress is about 100 years old. Like, is anyone there? And I know the FTC, they're not the same demographic, but like, who is even equipped to look at this stuff in the right way right now?
Well, Judge Mehta. So the judge in both cases have found Google to be a monopoly, and in both cases the judges are evaluating remedies. And in the search case, Judge Mehta has looked at evidence that Google is already using its search monopoly to dominate in AI, and the judge has the power to restrict or do all kinds of things to prevent that from happening. So it is just the case that we have one probably 65-year-old dude who will decide the future, but it's better than nobody.
Okay. Lastly, you mentioned there's Judge Mehta. There's someone named Bob Regular. And then there was someone else whose name was Severance, or almost.
Yes.
Did you make this book up? Did you use ChatGPT just to like come up with some names?
I laughed so much when I was interviewing people. The person who's in charge of reducing the headcount at DoubleClick after the acquisition by Google, her name was Severance. That was her last name.
I mean, that's ridiculous. She really had no choice but to go into that area of her.
Oh my God! Then there's the Ashton Kutcher, his involvement in header bidding, which we'll leave to the reader. I'll keep that one in my back pocket.
A little bit, right?
Gotta tease Ashton in between the '70s show and his modern incarnation was into header bidding. And there's just so many stories that, and some that didn't make it in the book. All
right. Well, awesome stuff, Ari. It's a terrific read. Really, congratulations. I'm sure this was an incredible work endeavor. I can't imagine that just the spell check alone that I would stymie me, but thanks so much for being here. Let's talk again.
Of course. Thank you for having me.